Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to do the reading taste book tag, and I have recently gotten some comments asking me about the kinds of books that I'm reading and what my reading tastes are, so I thought this would be a good a little introductory video if you're just starting out watching my channel to learn a little bit more about what I actually like reading and what kinds of books I'm talking about on my channel. So I hope this is interesting. Definitely let me know the answers to these questions down below if you want to. I would love to hear what your reading tastes are like and if we are similar or very different. That's always interesting to hear. There's obviously no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, so just feel free to share below. I will also link the video where I saw this tag first, so you can go and check that out as well. The first question I think is the hardest one, and that is describe your reading taste in one sentence. And I think if I want to really boil it down, it would be something like, I like reading about dark and heartbreaking and horrible things, and I also really like reading about fluffy, cozy, nice things. And that's really just the two things I like. Either very dark or very nice. So take that with a grain of salt. The next question is describe your reading taste with categories. So for genre, I would say my three favorite genres are fantasy, horror, and literary fiction. For age, I predominantly read adult books, but I do like the occasional YA horror or YA fantasy or a middle grade fantasy as well. Lengthwise, I think because I read so much fantasy, I do read some very big books. Currently in the middle of a very long series, so definitely have a lot of love for the big books, but at the same time in the last couple of months and years I've also started reading more novellas, and some of these are like really good. So I think we have a little bit of everything. I think if you look at my average, it's probably around like the 300-400 page mark. Editing kitty here, please do not perceive me, but I forgot to mention that I would also categorize myself as a character-driven reader, and I also really like reading about themes. The plot needs to be there and needs to be interesting, but I think if you mess up characters and themes for me, then I probably won't love your book. I don't know what else I could say for categories right now, so if you have any specific categories where you have questions, leave that in the comments. The third question is show us a few books that represent your reading taste. And I'm going to start with the adult fantasy. That is like the easiest for me because it's what I read the most of. And I think the two series that like definitely describe my taste the best, one is the Lord of the Rings series. This is the OG for me. Lord of the Rings is something I started reading when I was very young, around like 13 I guess, and it just made me fall in love with fantasy like so much, and especially like epic fantasy with like whole worlds that are reimagined and different and interesting, and just looking at different societies and everything like that. So that's definitely one. The other one would be the Broken Earth trilogy, because I think that this is such an interesting book series where you have like very important topics from our real world discussed in this like fantasy setting, and it's just so much. Yeah, it's just so interesting to explore these topics with like characters and scenarios that aren't real but still feel so real because you can really connect to the specific themes of the book. Then for YA fantasy, one of my favorite ongoing series is Legendborn. I think it's just really fun, but similarly to Broken Earth, we have them like real world themes that are explored through a fantasy lens. For literary fiction, here we have the thing where I just really like dark stuff. So Colson Whitehead is a fantastic author, and I think his darkest book probably is The Nickel Boys, but it's really good and it's a book that will always stay with me. That is just such a weird transition because the next book I wanted to mention is Stay With Me. And this is just a fantastic exploration of gender roles and expectations we have for men and women in our societies, and I really enjoyed that book. And last but not least, we have The Vanishing Half, which is also just a very interesting exploration of like topics that are just so timely and important, and in this one especially the topic of race and also colorism. For the horror books, we have another OG one, and that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle, one of my favorite books of all time. For me, that one is so scary and again has these like real world themes, but in this like horror scenario that we probably all won't ever live in, but it's still very interesting to look at it. And then I really like kind of like weirder horror books where there's just something like very strange going on. So one example of that would be Rules for Vanishing, and the other one would be The Hollow Places, where people just enter into another world. So that's probably like connected also with my fantasy love. But in these horror cases, it is like the most disturbing worlds you can imagine, and I really, really love that. And then I also wanted to mention some nonfiction books that I really love. The first one is my favorite book of all time, and that is Know My Name. This is an exploration of rape culture, so it's very near and dear to my heart. This book is phenomenal, and I hope everyone reads it. Then we have Fearing the Black Body, which is a book that looks at the connection of fat phobia and racism, which I think was so interesting. And this is something I also look at as a researcher, so it definitely gave me some of that like creativity, you know, the like research creativity you need sometimes. And last but not least, I wanted to mention The New Jim Crow, which is again a book about racism, especially in the US, and how the incarceration system is connected to racism. Then, question number 4. A book you didn't enjoy that seemed like it would be your taste. Now, I went through books that I gave very low ratings and thought, like, you know, which ones I did have high hopes for. And one of these books is Northanger Abbey by Val McDermott. This is a retelling of Northanger Abbey, which is famously my least favorite Jane Austen book. But I thought, you know, giving it that like newer lens from a like thriller author would be very interesting. Unfortunately, this was a complete fail. I hate this book, and I hope no one ever goes and reads it. Then we have 12 Kings, or the 12 Kings of Shara Kai, depending on where you are. And this is a series that I see around so much, and I thought I would absolutely love it. And then I read the first book, and it was so bad. And this was a book I tried to DNF, and that's how bad it was. Like, I never do not finish a book. But with this one, I tried. In the end, I caved because I only had I think 200 pages left or something. And I got it back from the library where I had gotten it first, and then returned, and then I got it back, and I just finished it off because it pains me not to know how a story ends, but I would never ever pick up the sequels. And whenever I see people raving about it, I'm like, I must be on a different planet because this book was so bad. Then we have the Grisha trilogy. Now, Leroy Dugo is one of my favorite authors, so you would think that I loved the Grisha trilogy, the original one. I did not. I did not like it. Like, there were parts that I enjoyed, but like the overall thing and the way the story was told was just not for me. And I'm glad I did not give up on Leroy Dugo after that, because I love all of her other books. Then we have a horror story that when I hear people talk about it, I'm like, how did I not love this? And that is Into the Drowning Deep. This book was just boring as fuck. And I do not understand why people love it. And it's so long. It's so long. And what I found so weird about it is that it is a very diverse cast, but then the diverse people in they all had plot armor. And that just felt weird to me. Like, if you're telling a horror story with a diverse cast, these people still can die, you know? It's just, I did not like that. And then last but not least, another horror story. This is a YA horror I thought I would really, really love, but did not like at all, was Cherish Farah. This again was just so boring. Now I listened to the audiobook of this, and the main character keeps saying control to herself in her head. And like for months after finishing this audiobook, I still had that voice saying control over and over in my head, and I just, oh, it was not good. Next question. A book you enjoyed that didn't seem like it would be your taste. And the first two books I have for this, I thought I might not love them. Like, obviously I don't read books where I think I won't like them. But you know, with some books you're like intrigued, but you don't know if you're gonna love them. And with these two, it was because they are YA contemporaries, which is not usually a genre I enjoy a lot. So the first one was Felix Ever After, which I absolutely loved. It is a, as I said, a YA contemporary about a trans boy, a demi boy, and just, yeah, him living his life, falling in love, having like parts of his identity revealed at his school, and there's just a lot going on in this book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then we have We Deserve Monuments, which I felt a little bit more sure about that I would love it because it has gotten such raving reviews. And this is one where we follow a girl as she goes back to the house of her dying grandma, and this explores sexuality and race and all of these things, and how teenagers grew up with these topics in the US. Then the next one is a classic. It's a sci-fi classic, and unfortunately I do not vibe well with sci-fi classics, but this one I just checked out from the library because it was so tiny and I was intrigued and I loved it, and that was War of the Worlds. I don't even know why, but like the whole idea of it is so fun, and I had the best time reading that book, and I did not expect to love it. And last but not least, we have a YA thriller. Again, that is a genre that I have been very unlucky with, but one book completely changed the game there, and that was Firekeeper's Daughter. And yeah, a YA thriller where a young girl gets sucked into a case that involves drugs. Now, this is also a topic that I'm not particularly interested in. I don't like stories about drugs, like crime with drugs, or, you know, like, can I even say that? I do not enjoy Breaking Bad. I thought it was so boring. I'm sorry. So yeah, that was just a big surprise that I ended up really loving that story. Next question. Show us some books on your TBR that seem like they will be exactly your taste. Now, this might be a little bit of a cop-out, but I have one book here where I have read the first two books in the series, and this is the third book that I still need to read, but I have to keep reminding myself that this is still on my TBR, and that is The God of Lost Words. This is a series where we have a library in hell, we have queer characters, which is something I love, we have complex relationships between all of these characters, which I love, and yeah, the whole setting with hell, and there's intrigue, and they go to these different worlds, which is something I really, really enjoy. So yeah, this series is just great. Then we have a nonfiction, The Woman's History of the Modern World. I do really enjoy reading nonfiction books. I have to do it more. It's just a struggle because obviously for my job, I work at the university, I'm a researcher. I read a lot of nonfiction stuff, like academic stuff, in my job. So sometimes I feel like more comfortable reading nonfiction when I'm on vacation, which is also odd, but that's just how it works. But this is one of the books that I'm really excited to finally read. And then for horror, there is two books that got a lot of buzz this year. The first one is The Eyes Are the Best Part. I'm very excited to read this one. I think this is about a Asian girl or woman who starts eating people, or at least their eyes, I don't quite know. And then we have We Used to Live Here, which seems to be like a haunted house scenario, which is just my jam. I love haunted houses. Number 7, a booktuber you watch who has similar taste to you, and I think the most similar is Jess from the channel Fit for Gaming, and yeah, we're like booktube-wise probably like almost the same person, and we have very few books where we disagree. We do have them though, like When the Moon Hatched, for example. But yeah, I just, whenever I watch Jess's vlogs, I'm like, oh my god, I either really want to read that book she's talking about, or I have read this book she's talking about, and we have such a similar opinion on it. So yeah, it just works out like that. Number 8, have you always had this taste in books, or has it changed over time? And I think in theory this has always been my reading taste. When I started reading, I was a big fan of the Goosebumps books, so horror was definitely something I read a lot when I was growing up. I, as I said, started reading The Lord of the Rings when I was around 13, so adult fantasy has played a huge role in my reading ever since. I started reading literary fiction a little bit older, probably when I was like 15 or 16, and I started out with classics and then it morphed into more literary fiction that was published recently. So I think it has been quite a normal development there that I don't see changing anytime soon. I had phases where I read a little bit more historical fiction, but I usually like it when it crosses over with my favorite genres. So if it has fantasy elements, or if it has like dark horror elements, or if it is written more like a literary fiction, like the Nickel Boys technically could also be a historical fiction, so something like that. So yeah, I think my reading taste has pretty much always been this way, but it's always like tweaked and goes off into like little other subgenres and stuff like that every once in a while. And I do try to read very broadly overall. This year has been very fantasy heavy, and I'm not mad about that, but I also do have a couple of like weird outlier books here and there that I also like to read. And the last question is to tag people. I don't usually have a lot of success with the people I tag, so I think this time around I'm just gonna tag Jess again, just because I mentioned her. And yeah, if you feel like doing this tag, definitely do it. I think it is quite interesting to see. And as I said in the beginning, I think it can be very interesting, especially for people who probably don't know your channel very well yet, to see whether the reading tastes align here. So I hope you learned something about me in this video, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye!